Hello, everyone. We're back. There's no stopping. Even on day 2, we're back to back with high-level, very informative, great panels. This one, of course, the upcoming one, is certainly not going to be an exception. It'll deal with innovation in cross-border journalism. Certainly, I'm very much looking forward to it, curious to hear about what the speakers have to say, and happy to yield now to the chair, the moderator of the session. It's none other than the chair of the European Center for Press and Media Freedom, Yannis Kotsifos. Yannis, the floor is yours.
Many thanks, and I'm really glad to be here with you in this afternoon, and I'm very much looking forward indeed to having this discussion about a term that for people of my professional age, I'm a journalist myself, has been rather complicated, rather challenging, but we are very much tempted to use it quite often, though I'm not always sure that we really do know what we are actually talking about. I mean, some of us have started working in newsrooms that had no internet connection, so you can easily realize what kind of major steps we had to take to adapt to the new situation. But have we actually adapted? Have we actually been familiarized in the way that we should? So I think that today's panel with our speakers will enlighten us on the real issues of the innovative part in journalism, because I do think that you'd all agree it goes far beyond using the tools that we sometimes like to use. It goes beyond having the right newsroom equipment and having the right education. It goes into the very narrative of journalism, into the very structure of the inquiry tools that we use. And all of our speakers today certainly have a lot of things in common, but there is one point that makes it even more important for us, that they have been sharing their expertise under the framework, within the framework of the cross-border journalism as implemented through the IJ for EU project. So I would really like to go on and welcome our panelists today. We have with us together Kishan Chan, who is a researcher at the Forensic Architecture. We have Bashar Deep, who is an open source intelligence specialist working for Lighthouse Reports, and who has actually also worked on the IJ for EU funded investigation Frontex at Fault, an extremely interesting topic, actually. And judging by my origin, you can probably realize that I have a very special interest in it. And we also have Hazel Sheffield, who is a freelance journalist based in London, and she worked on the IJ for EU-funded investigation Money to Burn. So I'd like to welcome you all, and I would like to start with a round of introduction. Each of you would, I would like each of you to present themselves, to tell us what you are doing and how you are affiliated to the cross-border journalism projects that we are talking about. And I suggest that we start with you, Kishan, if you're all right with that.
Hey, yeah, that's great. I'm just going to share a few slides just to give you an idea of what forensic architecture does. So if you just bear with me. Can you see my screen? I'm going to assume that you can all see my screen. So I'm Kish. I'm a researcher at Forensic Architecture. I've been with them for 2 years now. I'm architecturally trained, but specifically in forensic architecture. So we are an independent research agency based at Goldsmiths, University of London, utilising spatial and media analysis to investigate state and corporate violence worldwide. So from war crimes to violations of human or environmental rights. We're now a team of around 20 people of various backgrounds and disciplines, obviously including architecture, but also filmmaking, art, programming, and others. And to aid this discussion, I'm just going to give everyone a quick flavour of what we do through one of our recent projects. So we recently published our investigation in collaboration with media outlet Macedonia. And in this investigation, we're able to use the movement of the explosion as a three-dimensional clock, which itself is in a continuous transformation with a unique but discernible shape at each frame. And by cross-referencing each video source and using temporal markers such as the spherical explosion and the flash of light from the blast, we can place it in an accurate source 3D model of the city. And from this, we can build a spatial and temporal account of the incident. So by defining and analysing those different phases of the smoke cloud, we could then use that to build up a layout of the materials burning inside, namely the position of the central stack of ammonium nitrate, the fireworks and the tires that are stored in there. So by using photographs published by the New York Times, we can map a total of 240 bags of ammonium nitrate in the space. And given the direction of the and the edges of the stack, we can infer the position of the remaining 2,000 bags. And then finally, using this spatial layout, we could then judge the haphazard and carelessly stored bags of ammonium nitrate against internationally accepted benchmarks. So therefore, what we're kind of doing is using our very specific skill set of an architect in spatial analysis to then kind of shift the burden of responsibility back to the state and governing bodies. So that's what we do in a nutshell.
Thanks a lot, Kishan. It's really top technology to some of us. I'm sure there is room for improvement that you're already exploring. But my question to you is there room for what we might call traditional reporting, traditional journalism in that scheme that you're using?
Yeah, of course. I mean, we rely heavily on journalists to provide us with
in what way?
So, for example, this collaboration with Madam Massa, we needed someone closer to the site, closer to the ground, who understands the context a bit more, to really add the kind of nuance political understanding surrounding Beirut and Lebanon to the project. And not only that, but we also relied heavily on their kind of their networks and sort of traditional journalistic toolkit of gathering sources, talking directly to other sources on the ground to get information that we can then spatially analyze. So it's a very collaborative process between their investigative journalists and our kind of architects to really pull together that project and kind of uncover the layout of inside the warehouse.
Thanks a lot. I think that we can go on with you, Bashar. Would you please go on and introduce yourself and your tasks and your involvement at the IJ4EU investigation Frontex at Fault, if you'd like.
Can you hear me? All right, so my name is Bashar Deeb. I'm an open source investigative journalist. I work at Lighthouse Reports, and a big part of what I do is to look for crucial pieces of evidence online, to look at social media posts, to try to verify videos and footage, where it was taken, when it was taken, things like that. I started as a hobbyist, but then with the help of the Lighthouse Reports, my colleague, I kind of took it further. And with the involvement in the Lighthouse newsroom, I had the chance to develop my skills. So shall we speak about the Frontex investigation? All right. So to give you like a bit of context on this investigation, in the beginning of 2020, Greece started applying what it calls aggressive surveillance policy in the Aegean. So in reality, this was translated to a very big number of pushback reports. In some of these cases, the migrants were intercepted in Greek waters by men with face masks and balaclavas who would raid their dinghies, cut their engine, transfer them to life raft, and then tow them back to Turkish waters. In some other cases, things were a little more extreme, where migrants have indeed managed to reach Greek islands and were returned very quickly to Turkey with the same methods. So we at Lighthouse Reports have started investigating these violent pushbacks and these incidents starting from April 2020, and with some publications at the end of April and the beginning of May, we have proved beyond any reasonable doubt that multiple groups of migrants have reached Greece and were deported very quickly without their consent, without even being offered the chance to apply for asylum. Now, considering like the geography of the place, the distance between Greek islands and Turkish shores, where migrants usually choose to make their passage, is somewhere between 5 to 10 kilometers, which is a very close distance if you compare it with the distance, for example, between Libya and Malta. So these pushback operations became a normal sight for locals of the Greek islands. It became very normal sight for them to witness such incidents while they were relaxing on the beach or sitting on their house balcony. On the other hand, we had Frontex, which when was being asked about this kind of violation, always denied knowing about these practices, not to mention being involved in them. So for those who don't know about Frontex operations in the Aegean have a very big capacity. There are always multiple vessels patrolling all the points where the migrants are making their passage. Frontex also operates aircrafts of the surveillance aircraft over the Aegean, and they also have surveillance stations sat on top of the hills with thermal cameras, so they could see everything that's happening. So it didn't really make sense to us that they weren't aware of this wrongdoing by Greece. So we came up with a methodology that would attempt to test these Frontex claims. We partnered up with Der Spiegel, Bellingcat, ARD, and Asahi TV from Japan to start investigating whether Frontex is involved in any wrongdoing in the Aegean Sea. So the methodology we came up with was to collect videos taken by migrants themselves and published on activist pages while they were on the travel, while they were on the dinghy. We also collected coordinates which the asylum seekers would sometimes share with rescue organizations when things get a little bit rough in the sea, organizations like Alarm Phone or Aegean Boat Report. But we also masked all this information with the rescue footage from the Turkish Coast Guard archive. So the result of this first phase of investigation was a very detailed spreadsheet which has a lot of material on every pushback we could gather information on. Our second step in the investigation was to figure out which Frontex assets were being used in the IGN during 2020. Now, this was not a very easy task because Frontex is not very transparent about its asset and wouldn't respond easily to FOIA requests. So we had to figure out these assets ourselves. So what we did was to go to social media, places like Instagram, and check for pictures tagged next to the ports. And you would be surprised how many of these pictures are there on Instagram. And in many of these pictures, we were able to spot a Frontex asset and add it to our Frontex asset database. So yeah, we also relied heavily on people from the ship spotting community who always share their work online. So like a little bit of technical details, almost every vessel has something called an AIS transponder, which sends its signal. This signal includes the location. This signal gets sent every few seconds or minutes or so. And similarly, the airplanes also transmit their location through what is called ADSB signal. So what we did was to gather all this airplanes and vessels data for the Frontex vessels and the aircraft and put them on one interactive map along with the coordinates of migrants that they had shared with the rescue organization. So once we had done this, we were able to see that in many cases, the Frontex vessels were very close from a pushback. This is something that makes it hard to them to claim that they haven't witnessed anything. In one case also, we were able to see that the Frontex flight was right above a very violent pushback, which we had investigated in details months before. Now it's important here to note that not all the Frontex vessels transmit their locations. Many of them prefer to operate anonymously for some reasons. So all we have series of videos from Turkish Coast Guard, which shows Frontex Romanian vessel creating dangerous waves in order to push back migrants on a boat. This was supposedly on June 8th. So the only challenge was how to verify that this happened on the day that the Turkish Coast Guard claimed it did. So while the Frontex vessel in question, the Romanian one, was operating offline in the video, we were able to see another vessel, a NATO vessel, which was pretty much trackable on online services like Marine Traffic and Vessel Finder, and it was present on the same scene of the pushback. Additionally, the Turkish Coast Guard videos offer the site of the Turkish Coast Guard vessel radar, where we could see that a Portuguese Frontex vessel was also nearby of this event. So what we did was to take this screenshot of the radar, which shows the route of the vessels, and overlay it over on the actual route of the NATO vessel, and it was a total match. So this way we were able to say that on June 8th, we are pretty sure that there was a Romanian vessel actively endangering the safety of the dinghy, creating waves, and endangering the life of the migrant. Later on, the Frontex vessel would leave the scene, and the men with balaclavas from the Greek Coast Guard would come and attack the dinghy. On another date, we managed also to obtain a photo showing another Frontex Romanian vessel during a pushback. In this case, we have found survivors of the pushback who shared with us videos showing their boat without an engine. Also, the NATO vessel was present in this case. And with a similar methodology, we were able to verify the place and the date these pictures were taken. So to close this, the combinations of all the cases we had was enough to shed light on the activities of Frontex in the Aegean. After our reports, many other media outlets did follow-up stories on Frontex and these violations of human rights in the sea. Also, people within Frontex started whistleblowing more details about more cases, and nowadays multiple European bodies are investigating Frontex activities.
Thank you very much, Bashar. I find it extremely interesting. I do have a question though, and actually I rather share the question that one of our viewers has just shared at the chat session, and I strongly encourage all of you watching us to share your questions to the speakers there. And it's about the verification process that you would you please mute yourself while you're not talking, Bashar, because there is some feedback. Okay, some sound feedback. So what about the verification process that you use? Because you mentioned crowdsourcing as a way that you obtain, use to obtain information, which is a really well-known practice now and very efficient. And you also mentioned the use of pictures that you obtain through social media platforms and so on. But are you actually have a stage of verification before you go on and use this information?
Yeah, of course. Everything we do, everything we publish goes through a very long process of verification. So, like with the second case that I mentioned earlier, where we had obtained a photo showing a Romanian vessel being like exactly near the pushback, what we did was in the picture, there was another vessel which was trackable. So our Frontex vessel that we were interested in was not trackable on commercial services, but the other one, which is the NATO vessel, was pretty much trackable. So what we did was to check the metadata of the picture, check the route of the NATO vessel, and then compare it against the timing of the NATO vessel in the picture. So it was looking southeast, as far as I remember, and we had the metadata saying it happened at a certain time. And when we tried to track where it was at the moment the picture was taken, the vessel data showed that it was going in the same direction. This is how we verified the time of the picture. In regard to the place, like we could always see some mountains in the background, and this is very easy actually to verify. You just you can use the Google Earth 3D models and try to compare it against the mountains that are shown in the video.
Thanks a lot, Bashar. We'll possibly get back to you because yeah, it has been a great story, I can confirm, and with a lot of impact, as you all know, both political and in terms of journalism, because as you mentioned, a lot of media followed up and that actually operate to more information flowing around this extremely important situation that we have. Thank you once again, and now it's Hazel's turn. Hazel Sheffield, a freelance journalist who worked for the IJ4EU investigation, Money to Burn. Hazel, the floor is yours now.
Thanks so much. It's so nice to be here, especially among such an amazing panel. So thank you for having me. And thank you, Bashar. That was really fascinating. So I'm a freelance journalist working in the UK, and I was a grantee of IJ4EU with a project called Money to Burn, which was a multimedia cross-border investigation into renewable energy policies in the European Union. We were a team of 6 close-knit team, and there's 16 journalists in total on the project. We worked together for 3 months with the grant from IJ4EU to investigate the wood pellet industry, very rock and roll, after a tip-off from an Estonian colleague that a lot of the forests in Estonia were shrinking as Western European countries like the UK and the Netherlands had ramped up their imports of wood as an alternative to coal in our plants. So I think we're on this panel because we think we were innovative, although listening to those two previous presentations, you can be the judge. But we I think pushed the journalists' definition of innovation in certain ways. So in the process of our investigation, we employed a suite of open source encrypted tools to collaborate. We used a Nextcloud suite, which is like a Google Docs alternative, and we share files and then organized files using a kind of Wikipedia called DocuWiki, where we could each see what the other person was working on, and therefore we didn't all do the same thing. We could divide our team and then collaborate using this platform because we could see what everybody else's work as it was happening. We also use Signal and Rocket Chat to communicate rather than Slack or WhatsApp, for example, for security reasons mostly. And we also embrace this idea of radical sharing, which basically means that you just trust your colleagues to see everything you're doing as you're doing it, which might not seem that innovative in other industries, but in journalism, where there has traditionally been an element of competition between newsrooms, and the idea that you wouldn't release your findings before they were published, that was somewhat interesting and unusual. We also used some geospatial platforms and tools to conduct our reporting. I've got a new puppy, sorry. To conduct our reporting before we were able to go to Estonia. So we used a platform called Global Forest Watch, which is real-time data on the world's forests. So you can see deforestation in real time using the satellite data. And we uploaded boundary files for Natura areas. So these Natura areas are protected under birds and habitats directives under the EU, so that we could see in Estonia, which was our principal place of investigation, how the forest mass was changing in areas that were supposed to be protected under regulations. And then using this data, we were able to decide where we wanted to go when we went to Estonia to start doing real, as we would call it, shoe leather on the ground reporting. And in November, late November, a small team of us, despite the coronavirus restrictions, made it to Estonia. And I sort of sat in this, it was a kind of Russian icons museum in Tallinn, with my OSINT expert on one end in the UK telling me, sending me this real-time satellite data, and my team out on the field in southern Estonia in the forests. And so I could say to them, you know, you need to go west a couple of fields or south, and you should see a clearing. And then they were reporting with some NGOs in the field on the condition of the forests, what the soil was looking like. We took loads of pictures. We were able to do 3D visualization, sort of street view almost simulations of what the ground looked like after the forest had been cleared, and what the kind of habitats for birds and animals looked like after the forest had been cut down. And our final story piece was published in partnership with VPRO, which is the Dutch public broadcaster, and we did a 10,000 word interactive feature, which we worked very closely with some Estonian developers to produce. So we were very interested in kind of the design of that story and how we could take the reader to the places that we had been to see for themselves what that looks like, that kind of reduction in forest mass and the devastation of that environment. And we published various iterations of the story with various, I think it was 16 partner media, or 16 journalists, about 12 partner media, including The Guardian in the UK, Zeit Online in Germany, Publico in Spain, a suite of radio broadcasts in the Netherlands and in Estonia, and lots of newspaper coverage in Estonia as well. And we have reason to believe that our investigation is being discussed at policy level in the EU when it comes to biomass. So yeah, we're still talking to each other as a team and applying for more funding to do other topics. But unlike the other two people, I think this was a fairly standalone team and investigation. Thank you.
Hazel, yeah, a standalone team. But you mentioned, before I do that, would you please, all three of you, turn on your cameras, because I think that it would be nice for people to be able to see all of us while we start a short round of conversation. Great. And of course, all of you watching us are going to ask your questions to the speaker through the session. You mentioned the standalone team, and you also mentioned the very open and transparent way of working. So everybody actually had access to the pieces of information that others were gathering. And that brings me to the question, is there room for that kind of work in big traditional media outlets? Or let me rephrase, or just try to go one step further. Is there room for actual innovation in the ways that you think for media? It's a question not just to Hazel, but to all three of you.
I'm losing you a little, Yannis. Did everybody else hear that? Or maybe you could repeat the question.
You couldn't hear me. Can you hear me now? Okay. So my question was whether there is room for working in the way that you use in this open and transparent and creative way, and if there is room for innovative tools usually implemented by small-scale teams for the big news outlets, for the big traditional newsrooms.
I'll maybe just say something briefly about that, if I may. Yeah, we were working with The Guardian, as I said, on our investigation, and we didn't come to them with our story until December, so after we'd been to Estonia, partly because we were afraid that we wouldn't get a commission from them if we came to them without all the stuff, you know, all the evidence, and we knew that we'd get a lot when we were there. And this presented challenges actually with our partnership with them, because I think lots of major newsrooms would rather have a hand in an investigation of that nature at the beginning, so that they can shape it and they can see where the information is coming from. It's a lot to ask of editors who are overstretched and their legal departments to come in at the end when you've already done a lot of the work. So I think I would probably go to a big newsroom earlier than we did. Having said that, if you're kind of unknowns, as we were, it's very hard to get the ear of an editor, especially one at a very big publication like The Guardian. So I think there's a really tricky balance there. I think your question hits on a real challenge of the kind of work that we're trying to do.
Okay, thank you, Bashar. What's your approach to this?
So, like the way we did our latest investigation, our Frontex investigation, like it has mainly to do with the way my organization, Lighthouse Reports, work. So we basically partnered up with the media that we did the story with, which are Spiegel, Bellingcat, and ARD from the beginning. And this is like the model that Lighthouse work on. because we're not a publishing platform, this puts us in a unique position to create newsroom and gather big media outlets to work at the same time. So basically, instead of having multiple journalists from multiple organizations trying to do a story on the same topics, basically, like you can, the way we do this is to gather all the energy and the resources of this media outlet and put it together in a way that will bring a better story to the reader, that will bring a story with more angle, maybe more local angle, depending on which outlet we are talking about. So yeah, I think this is the Lighthouse Reports approach to this.
Maybe I'll just jump in here, seeing as we're waiting. So just to talk a little bit about FA's approach to that. I think we come up against similar struggles because we often, if we find money for a particular project, by the time it's completed and we've done all of our research and kind of investigated the incident a bit more and have a spatial and temporal kind of like understanding, we're ready to publish. Often there's a bit of a clash there with big media outlets. So as Hazel was saying, they want a hand in the kind of production of the investigation itself. Whereas we often kind of collaborate with generally often not media outlets, maybe like lawyers, maybe the family, maybe other kind of investigative newsrooms like Lighthouse or Bellingcat. So we have come up against a bit of pushback from big outlets, particularly The Guardian, especially on Beirut. But with Beirut, we were collaborating with Madame Massa earlier on, and then published with Mediapart in France, just on their YouTube channel though. I suppose that in the way that other projects come to life, the Gulzar case, for example, in which we collaborated with Lighthouse, we were already working in the region on pushbacks along the Evros-Meriç River between Greece and Turkey, and Lighthouse became aware of our work on that area and the kind of the asset library and all of the spatial research we'd done around the kind of the river and forest, and we were able to like bring that to the quite already established team of like Sky News, Lighthouse, Pointer, Bellingcat, and play like a slightly different role where we handed over a lot of that kind of maybe like open source investigation responsibility, media responsibility to others, and played a very like specific spatial analysis role. But yeah.
Thank you. I have one last question. When you're looking for partners, when you are looking for the right partners to build and facilitate this cross-border collaborative reporting that we are talking about, what are your priorities? Are your priorities more related to technological skills and so on, or are you looking for people who have a journalistic background? I really wonder what the right balance might be for your line of work.
Is that the question directed at me?
It's a question directed to all of you.
Okay, sure. Maybe I'll just start seeing as I'm muted. Yeah, so generally we bring the kind of most of the technological and maybe forensic, architectural, spatial understanding. whereas we, as I was kind of was saying before, we leave that kind of traditional journalistic investigation to the experts. So, for example, with Macedonia, they were bringing us content that could be spatialized, or sources that could be spatialized, doing most of the verification for us, and then we kind of add on that extra level of verification in 3D and use kind of our skills to then build on top of that source. So I think generally when we're looking for partners, well, generally people come to us, so either be, as I was saying, the lawyers, families, victims' families, or media outlets. We're kind of looking for something other than our skill set. So generally it's kind of that traditional investigative role and a platform for which we can like publicize the work.
Thanks a lot. Hazel, what about you?
Yeah, I think for us, because we were concerned about the biomass trade, we wanted to work with publishers in some of the key countries in that trade. So some of the biggest importing countries, the UK is the biggest, we import the most biomass, and then the Netherlands and Germany. And then, of course, we wanted to work with a lot of Estonian media outlets because that's where we were focusing our investigation, and Latvia as well, which is a neighbouring country. And as the investigation went on, we had a core team which made up some of those countries. But as we developed our understanding of the trade, we figured out which other outlets and countries we needed to approach. And then we basically just did a lot of Googling to find out the best media outlets to, places where they had a strong environmental focus in the countries that we wanted to work with. So Portugal, for example, Denmark, we were unsuccessful. They were already doing a lot on biomass, and Sweden, places like that. So it was very organic in our case. As our investigation developed, we kind of grew the team to the 16 journalists it became.
Thanks. Thank you, Hazel. And finally, you, Bashar, before we session now, how are you going looking now for partners? What are you looking for?
So picking partners is not exactly my responsibility in the organization, but I can tell you like few things that I know. That I think that when Lighthouse Reports to investigate. So yeah, I think these are like the main parameters to select partners. But again, I'm not the right person to answer this question, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you, Bashar. And thank you all for sharing with us this extremely interesting content. I think that all of those that you mentioned are very clear examples how innovation is actually integrated, structurally integrated in the understanding of cross-border partnerships and cross-border reporting. Thank you all of us for this with us, and all of you for sharing with us, and thank all those who followed this session that I hope that you found interesting.
Well, thank you so much to Yannis and his wonderful panel for highlighting the cutting-edge investigative techniques that promise to keep cross-border journalists ahead of the curve. Thank you so much. Well, day 2 is certainly rapidly advancing. This was already our 3rd panel of the day. 3 down, 1 more to go, 1 final panel coming up after this short break. It'll deal, of course, with the very highly publicized, internationally newsmaking Ibiza affairs, and will take you behind the headlines. The people behind revealing the Ibiza affairs will be with us and will be sharing the insights behind the door, behind the scenes story. Very much looking forward to that. For now, we'll take yet another break, our final break of day 2. We'll be back here in less than 15 minutes with the 4th and final panel of day 2.